Hello and welcome to the Schola Progenium. Today I will be talking about reserves and tactics to do with reserves. So, first of all, what is the point of reserves? What is the point of this video? Well, very simply, the point of this video is to teach you how to take objectives and win battles. That's it. It's very simple. Now, how do these sort of things link together? Well, basically what we're talking about here is we're talking about taking objectives in the late game and sort of making sure that you take objectives in the late game. Now, how do these reserves differ to sort of deep strike reserves that you may be more familiar with these days in 8th edition? Well, you won't be using these units with the main push at all at any point in the game. That is totally the opposite of what you want to be doing. You're keeping these units, they're not in deep strike necessarily, more than likely not. You're keeping these units back in your rear lines, away from the enemy, away from a threat, not posing any threat, so that you ultimately have them available to you in the late game. But you want to balance this right so that you're not leaving the rest of your army missing out from any firepower or points that could be spent winning the main battle. There's no point having a unit of reserve sat at the back if the rest of the army's been wrecked and they are not in themselves going to move on to the objective and be able to take it, because the enemy forces will be able to shift them straight off again in one turn with the click of their fingers. So, how are we going to balance this, and where does this sort of before I go into this, where does this idea come from? Well, I've been using this idea sort of more recently in my games more and more because I was sort of thinking about reserves in past editions. Now I have in my possession rule books for 40k, literally from 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, you know, the full whack. And you know, in recent editions, you know, for many years, you know, reserves have been available, you know, maybe a couple of changes to dice rolls and that kind of thing, but generally speaking, between turns 2 and 4, I mean, you had units coming on as late as turn 4, and people would often manipulate the dice roll to bring these random reserves on, you know, so that the reserves could come on as late as possible. This value, the value in this tactic, is well recognised, and you know, veteran players will acknowledge this tactic, and you may see this tactic taking place on the battlefield. You may use this tactic in some ways yourself, and maybe this video will just give you a couple of new ideas, a couple of little bits of inspiration, hopefully. Maybe if you're a newer player, this video will sort of open your eyes to what more advanced players are doing to you, sort of right in front of your eyes, but you don't even notice it, and hopefully be able to prevent that from happening, and in the meantime sort of start incorporating these tactics into your own battles so that you can start winning games. So, how does this work? Well, I will break down the next section of this video, the how to do this part, into basically 2 broad sections and a mini bit at the end on general principles. But the 2 sections will be the loadouts that you want to be taking and ideas for loadouts, because there's a bit of flexibility there, and also how to use those loadouts to achieve these objectives, to steal objectives in the late game from the enemy. So, first of all, let's look at the different type of loadouts you can take. So there's sort of 3 main loadouts that you're going to take for your reserves, and then a sort of 3.1. There is an additional loadout which you can take and experiment with, and it does really work very well, but it's not a main part of this idea. It doesn't give you enough troops. So the first thing is that this all of these loadouts in whatever of the 3.1 formats you take need to be cheap, because as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to be taking firepower and effective units and tactical flexibility away from your main forces when you're trying to win the main battle. You just need these reserves to be cheap, but you need enough models in the units to be able to take an objective and sit on it, and you even when potentially enemy models are also on that objective and you are genuinely, contesting that objective and just trying to win by 1 or 2 models, which is part of the tactics we'll look at in a little bit. So you need them to be cheap, but you need them to be effective enough to shift an enemy unit off the objective and kill down enough models that you can effectively contest that objective. So, the 3 loadouts, in broad sort of terms that you'll fiddle around with yourself a little bit, and I'll give you a few sort of starting ideas, are a rhino filled with OBSEC troops. Your second type of reserve unit is a rhino filled with a unit of 5 OBSEC troops, and we're talking tactical marines here, and an assault section, which is going to be the 5 assault marines or 5, slightly more expensive models if you want, but you want to keep it cheap because, again, you don't want to be taking away from the force. And also, if they're sort of fancier models like 5 Death Company on foot, the enemy's kind of going to spot what you're up to, and they're going to try and pinpoint this unit. Now, you may also be taking a rhino that is OBSEC but shooty, so it has 5 OBSEC troops in it and then a shooty backup reserve. And then your 3.1 is what I call the Plinky Razorback, and I'll go into all of these in more detail now, and then we will look at these different loadouts, and we will look at how we will achieve our objective of stealing objectives off your opponent late game, so your strategic objective. So, in your OBSEC Rhino, you're just going to have 2 units of 5 or 1 unit of 10 that you split up into 2 5s of tactical marines. Now, these tactical marines are cheap. They're really, really cheap. 65 points a unit. If you've got 2 in there, plus a rhino with no stormbolt or nothing, then you're looking at 200 points. Bang on the nose. Now, I recommend taking a stormbolter when you first include this unit in your army, and then if you're struggling for points at the end, just trying to fiddle a few points around, you could do with 2 or 4 points. Take the stormbolters back off again because they don't really need it, but they are useful. And they're useful for a little bit of long-range plinking. You don't really want to be doing that, but it depends on your tactics, which we'll discuss in a little bit. So, you can take on this OBSEC Rhino a few special weapons. So, what you want to be taking is special weapons that have a relatively high strength, a big enough strength to knock infantry units of basically any level of ability off an objective reliably, like at least 1 model. So you're looking at plasma, which can prang off 2 shots and even overcharge. Got a lot of flexibility when you're late game running up to an objective for a very low points investment. You, as a Blood Angel, can take heavy flamers, which are very interesting because if you can get within 8 inches, which you will be able to do if you set off turn 4, get there turn 5, you can hop out with your tactical marines, blast a unit that's on an objective with a heavy flamer, and if it's a weak unit, it's going to suffer some serious damage. And if it's a slightly tougher, more elite infantry unit that's holding that objective, it will still hopefully lose a model. So you want to keep these. This is your cheapest option to reduce the impact on your main forces as much as possible, while still being able to shift a unit off an objective. But in sparing the points, you will lose flexibility in the toughness of objectives you can steal, because you're going for a snatch and grab here, and these objectives are going to be defended to a degree. Now, these units can only really take on other OBSEC units or very heavily mauled elite units that are holding objectives. But the advantage is that against those OBSEC units, you've got 10 models, and you will hopefully kill a few of theirs. And even if they've got sort of 2 units on there because they're a horde army, or a big unit if they're a horde army, hopefully you'll be able to kill enough of theirs down, rush 10 of your models onto there. Hopefully you only have to run 5 on there and keep 5 safe in the Rhino. But you've got 10 OBSEC models, you can run up to the objective late game and hopefully over contest that objective, have more OBSEC models on there, and successfully pinch it off an OBSEC unit. Or have enough models so that a highly battered elite unit, if you can just strip 1-2 models off with a shooting phase and an assault phase, you can survive a battering from them until the end of the game. Now, your second unit is a slightly more advanced unit, and this is the Rhino, the OBSEC Rhino with assault support. So you've got your 5 OBSEC units in there, and basically you're going to have them without special weapons. They can take a special weapon if you want to support the unit going in, but they're not really going to. What you're going to do is you are going to instead spend a few points, not very many, on the assault unit to make them slightly more effective. Now, what you might do is you might give that assault unit a plasma weapon, but I wouldn't recommend it because this assault unit is going to be going in as a 5-man unit and is more likely to die. And I mean, you're spending the points on these units so that you have enough models in there for them to, and they're tough enough and have decent enough armor in cover and have a decent enough transport that isn't damaged yet in the late game, that they can survive even being focused on in the late game, because your opponent will have fewer units, and the units that do high damage are probably above 10 wounds and so not as able to hit you and do effective damage. So what you're going to do is you are going to drive up, what you're going to do is you're going to take those units and you are going to equip them with 1 power weapon, say a power axe or a power sword, something cheap, and maybe a special weapon, maybe something cheap like a flamer. But again, this is another cheap option. Now, your third unit is your Rhino, OBSEC and Shooty, and this is the more expensive option here, because what you're looking at here is you're looking at a 5-man OBSEC unit, again not equipped with any special weapons or anything like that. They're sitting in the Rhino or running onto the objective when it's clear. But your Shooty unit is going to probably be Devastators. Now, that may sound unusual, but take a second to think about Devastators as an entry in your codex, as a Space Marine or a Blood Angel, as anybody. Now, your Devastators come equipped not with the basic weapons of heavy bolters or flamers or something like that. No, they come equipped with just bolters, and up to 4 men in the unit can be given additional weapons. So what this means is you can, at 10 points a model, grab a couple of heavy bolters, maybe even 3. So this unit's, as a base costs 65 points. So you've got your 5 OBSEC tactical marines and you've got your 5 effectively tactical marines, but they don't have OBSEC. They cost the same points though, so you're flat 200 points. Then basically, if you want to spend 220 to 230, 240 points on this Rhino, and you at the most 250 with storm bolters and that kind of thing, you will have ultimately equipped this unit with enough firepower to strip most enemy units in the late game off an objective, even if it's quite heavily defended. If you have 3 heavy bolters firing 9 shots and there's a unit of anything that's toughness 3 sat on that objective, you are going to strip a fair number of wounds off. If you have a sort of relatively battered to mid-level elite unit and you find 9 heavy bolter shots, you jump out of a rhino and just spray them up, you can really do some damage. And the advantage of the heavy bolter unit, the shooter unit, is that you can do this in turn 4 and turn 5, so you get 2 rounds of shooting. So what you effectively do is, in these tactics overall, you're going to be setting off around turn 4 towards the objective, after the main battle has sort of settled down. And with the shooter units, you will be hopping out turn 4 if you've got heavy bolters in there, and you start laying down fire at that point. The enemy will see what you're up to, and they'll probably shoot the heavy bolters, which is fine. So you get that 1 round of shooting out of them. If they target your rhino, there's a good chance they won't blow it up, or if they do blow it up, you are close enough to the objective to take it with the remaining forces. And maybe not, but probably the game will go on to turn 6 and you'll still get it, and you'll just have to put a bigger push on that objective, because things are starting to go wrong. But if things are going right, or even going mediocre, you will hop up to that objective and you'll take it off the enemy, and you will shift the enemy off the objective. So sort of what are the more specific tactics? Now I've touched on a variety of tactics for these units, so I'm not going to go and repeat myself for ages, so I'll just do a very brief outline on tactics, a bit of guidance that will set you in the right direction so that you can start using these tactics effectively straight away in your armies, and start winning more battles straight away, because this will win you battles. It's that simple. I'm not exaggerating. I'm not someone who exaggerates. If I use a unit and like a unit but it's difficult to use and not that good, I will acknowledge its disadvantages. But this is a very simple and easy to use tactic that's very easy to adapt to, incorporating into basically any strategy in any list that you have, that will help you win games time after time against a variety of opponents. And isn't that the kind of thing that we all need to know? So what are you going to do? Well, regardless of the combination of units that you've taken in your rhinos, you are going to do the same thing effectively, which is turn 4 you are going to set off towards the objective. If you've gone for the shooty option, hop your dudes out, start spraying. Forwards, backwards, into cover, whatever, as long as they can shoot at the objective. Yeah, you'll hit on turn 4 on 4s, but whatever. Then, what you might want to consider at this point, if you have a assault/obsec combo, is if you see a unit that is sort of near an objective that you're driving towards. So say the objective that you were going for is really lightly defended. It was heavily defended, but turn and tide in the battle, you got lucky and that unit's not really there anymore, but they have another unit nearby that could threaten you if the game goes on to turn 6. Hop your assault unit out, attack them, take them down. That unit will be tied up, occupied, and possibly killed, but definitely dealt with for the rest of the game. Even if the game goes on to turn 6, you carry on, drive up to that objective that you were expecting to have to take with more force, but is now lightly defended. You sit in it, it's yours. Strip the last few guys off, jobs are good. So you're driving up turn 4, and that's when you sort of think, what am I doing here? Am I getting my shooter units out? Where am I putting them? Am I putting them in cover? Did I take some stern guard because I had a few points to spare, and I'm really trying this thing out, and I really want to shift. My meta is quite heavy, tough opponents, so even the late game stuff takes some serious firepower. So I spend a bit more on my reserves, and I need to get them quite close. So you need to consider these things. But generally, turn 4 you set off towards your objective. Turn 5 is arrival time. It's take the objective before the enemy can do anything about it, because you're doing a snatch and grab here. So if you've got the shooter unit, you've already sprayed once. If they're alive, spray again. If not, maybe you'll need to do a little bit of spraying at this objective with your surviving units. But the idea is that you can pull this off whether you've been knackered quite a bit and you're sort of losing, and you can snatch the game back and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat, or if you're winning and you just want to secure victory, if you're in a tournament you want to secure a major victory, you know, whatever the situation, this unit should act independently, effectively. And if you've got the assault unit, you hop them out, you charge in. If you're Blood Angels, you know, if you're not a Blood Angel, you're just a Space Marine, you're still going to be doing more damage to a well-defended objective. Like you'll do more damage to units that are dug in on a well-defended objective if you use an assault-based unit to sort of soften them up. That's just a fact of the game. That's just the way it is. I can tell you that from like countless games experience. Other people can tell you that, and you can, you know, you may know that you're already, or can experience this for yourself. Try this tactic out. But you know, sending a 5-man assault unit in against most, either, as I've said, battered to medium level elite units of infantry, or you know, full strength obsec units, that assault unit will run in, chop them up, kill half of them, you know, because you're striking, they've not got the benefit of cover saves. You're probably doing hitting with more attacks because you're in close combat and you're not sort of out of rapid fire range, because it's usually one or the other. Rapid fire, expose yourself, or stay out of rapid fire and you're in cover, or charge in, fight them. And you'll take that objective, you'll just clear that objective, you'll clear it, and then what you do is you either sit on it with your obsec unit. You've driven that obsec unit after you've hopped your units out, you've driven it up 12 inches. If it's taken damage, 6 inches and advance. If you're Blood Angels, always remember you can spend a command point to get a d6 plus 6 advance. So if you're late game, you're just pushing for this objective, can't quite reach it, you've got a command point to spend, bump. You'll never forget that. You can always get onto that objective if you're a Blood Angels. Another Blood Angel specific tip is that you, of course, hit with more damage in close combat. So even your tactical Marines, when you're trying to swarm an objective, can, you know, get that extra damage in close combat. So it's always good to just, you know, shoot and charge. And in 8th edition, obviously, you can rapid fire and charge. You don't have to use bolt pistols if you go into assault in. So, you know, rapid fire and charge. Right, so you've taken your objective. You've done it. Well done. Congratulations. You should use these tactics. Now, there is a little bit more that you need to know, and then this video will be over very shortly. So, a cheeky trick to do this without spending any points on reserves. How can you pull off all of these tactics without spending a single point on reserves? Well, first of all, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get yourself a little bit of experience with these tactics. You're going to need to spend a couple of games, 2-3 games, where you try out reserves and settle on a combination or a direction that works for you. So maybe you play 2 games, one with sort of the assaulty combo, one with the shooty combo, and you think, right, I'm going in the shooty direction. You play your 3rd game, you know, with that a little tweaked, a bit more refined. Then, once you've tried everything out and you kind of, you know what you're doing, you know what you can get out of those units, you can know what level of defences you can expect to shift with either of the combos in your games, in your meta, then what you can do is this. You can sort of turn 2 to 3, well, turn 3, start retreating a rhino that has expelled its previous inhabitants. So say you had some tactical Marines and you've taken an objective. Let's say you had some assault Marines, you've taken an objective. You know, whatever has left that rhino for whatever reason. You know, even if you were planning to keep that rhino full of troops in the midfield, spraying away, and you've got the tactical marines there for tactical flexibility, and the time comes when you need to hop those tactical marines out in the main battle, and you hop them out, and because they're exposed and the tactical marines and they're obsec, and your opponent knows what they're doing, he shells the tactical marines and he kills most of them, and you've got like 2 left. Do not fear, that is not a problem by any means. Those tactical marines can still fulfill the exact same objective that they would have done previously, what you planned for them, which is to take an objective ultimately if they're obsec, ideally. Because ultimately, if you can take an objective that doesn't have any obsec troops on it, it doesn't matter if you have one tactical marine or you have 10 tactical marines. So all you need to do is make sure that that last couple of guys survives, and chances are, if there's 1 or 2 guys left, which is often the case after a unit or 2 has had a focus blast, unless they go for proper overkill, there'll be a unit left, and if they're not willing to go for overkill, those guys will last out the shooting phase. And what you do is you hop back in your rhino immediately and you start backing away. Now the key thing is that you now observe the battlefield. Take a second to take everything in and have a look. What have you got scattered around the battlefield? Oh look, I had another rhino that as I was driving up was blown up. I have and the occupants have got into a combat and they've done well for themselves, and I've got a couple of assault marines left or something like that. Or turn 2, I jumped a unit of assault marines out and I went for sort of a low level enemy character and I chopped them up, and now I've only got 2 assault marines left. Hop them in the rhino, and what you're going to do effectively, another unit, devastators. So let's say you didn't take obviously you've not spent any points on the devastators, so you've not got that sort of 5-man unit of devastators with 2 heavy weapons, 3 heavy weapons, but you have got a unit of devastators that you hopped out in the first turn. They had the first turn or you had the first turn, and then you hop your devastators out, and the turn after they hopped out they got shelled a little bit or a fair bit, and again they've been reduced down to maybe 2 models. Even 1 devastator can be useful. Pop a missile launcher, great, wicked. Heavy bolter, awesome, take that, although you're less likely to take heavy bolters on whole units of devastators because there's so many of the platforms you can take them on. But you've got that special weapon, hop him in the party bus, and eventually what you've got is you've got this little party going on of more than 5 models that have come from scattered units that have taken damage that is just a natural process of the game, and on their own they would just be plinking. Those 3 tactical marines that were sat on a mid-table objective were just plinking away. They're out of rapid fire range of anything in the back, any of the opponents obsec or any pathfinders or anything they can reliably shoot at and actually kill. They're not really doing anything. Hop them in the rhino. They weren't doing anything anyway. It's not going to take anything away from the battlefield. You've had some use out of them. The enemy's had to target them already. You hop them in the rhino. The enemy ignores you. Back away. And eventually, sort of turn 5, sort of turn 4, you want to have backed onto the vicinity of a mid-game objective where the main fighting's going on, where it's tipping either way in your favour or against you. And then turn 5, obviously, and turn 4 you hop a couple more units in, or a couple more scraps of this, that and the other, a couple of assault units, this, that and the other. And because remember 8th edition, you can have as many units as you want in there as long as they're allowed to be in the transports. You can have individual models in there, 10 individual models if that was the case. Unlikely, but if that were the case you could do it. So then what you do is turn 5 you just do the same thing as you would have done anyway. You hop all of those units out, maybe you charge 2 separate assault units in, maybe you charge some stern guard, maybe you charge some assault marines, whatever. You've got these scraps of units, and what you've done effectively is you would be doing the same thing anyway. You would be collecting scraps of units and attacking objectives and making final pushes on objectives, but what you've effectively done is you've ensured that you've got these final units available, ready to use and ready to focus them in on an objective and again steal that objective late game. Now, the main thing to say here is that overall, general principles in the final minute or two of the video is that you want to keep the following things in mind. Your units, when you're building them and putting them in the list, need to be cheap, but need to be able to shift a late game unit. And you will be facing a variety of units, a whole different variety of units that have been taken different amounts of damage. Some will be full health, some will not be. You need to aim to become forgotten. Your movements need to be subtle. You've got a lot of other things going on in the battlefield. You've got big things smashing things, you've got your termies, you've got your land raider blowing stuff up, you've got loads of stuff going on. This is the kind of tactic that you need to do subtly, behind the scenes of the big show. Close, because you're going to do a final push on the big show, but not doing anything to draw attention to yourself. You need to adapt simply to having fewer points in your main force. That's just something you need to do. And that's what I'm saying, it'll take a couple of games. The first game, you won't really notice specifically that 200 points that you've kept out of the battle. You won't specifically notice it, but you may just lose the game because you basically lost the main push too significantly because you just didn't have the firepower you needed. You were missing some stuff that you took out of your list in exchange for these guys that you shouldn't have taken out, and you need to tweak your list and do a little bit of distillation. But all in all, it will be worth it. The investment is worth it. And that brings me on to my final point, the patience. Not only should you have patience in incorporating these tactics, because once you do, they will be a part of every battle that you fight in some way or another, even if you're just collecting up units for the late game. But the main principle is patience. There will be loads and loads of opportunities for you to use these units, loads of them. The enemy will do a push on your back lines. Stay strong unless you can make sure that those units will be alive and at full strength in the late game, not take a loss. Then hold strong, move them away from the danger, don't support the danger. If your backlines suffer, so be it. You're going to be stealing an objective anyway. You'll take your backlines back, you'll work it out. You need to be patient, because if you are patient, then ultimately this tactic will always deliver an objective to you. And the underlining principle of everything that I've said in this video is this: in the late game, you have been fighting against your opponent for multiple turns, and your units are damaged and in many ways unreliable because they are not performing at an effective level, or at a level that you're used to, because they're a relatively new unit and you're not used to them firing at half strength in this circumstance at this target, or whatever the context. But if you have this blob of reserves that is full strength and ready to go with just enough firepower to really cause your opponent trouble, the last thing they want is that turning up in the late game, but they won't do anything to stop you. They can't do anything to stop you, because that is so far out of the way that they would have to commit long range, high damage weapons or specialist units such as flyers, which generally would struggle to crack open a rhino on their own unless they're a really big flyer like a Storm Raven, or a really good anti-tank flyer. They are not going to be able to afford to commit the resources in the early and mid game to crack open your reserves, so you just keep them back. You be patient. Your patience will deliver you a unit at full strength that will ruin your opponent's plans, because whatever the situation in that central area where you've been battling back and forth throughout the whole game, throughout 5 turns, whatever the situation, whether it's tipped slightly in your favour or slightly in their favour, what is absolutely going to help you tip that you sort of irreversibly in your favour. There's going to be 10 infantry models in a almost full strength to full strength transport, packing enough punch to shift them off the objective. That's what you need, and that's the last thing they need, and that is what you will have for a very small investment in points, and just, you know, really strict patience and a good eye for timing, you know. And the more and more you use this tactic, the better you will become with it. It is an easy tactic to learn, but has, you know, a really good level of mastery to it that you can really get into and sort of really learn how to sort of steal in almost any objective in any situation. You know, you go to town with this idea, you go to town with this principle, I've set you off in the right direction, and now you have all the tools you need to go ahead and steal, basically, in the future, any objective that you want from the enemy in the late game, and win those games, win those battles for the Imperium and for the Emperor. This has been the Schola Progenium. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.